Good evening, and thank you for joining the Piute-Eldorado Valley ACEC Management Plan and EA virtual public meeting. I would like to introduce Shauna Duman, BLM Las Vegas Office Field Manager, who will initiate the meeting.
Hi, thank you, Susie, and welcome. My name is Shauna Duman, and I'm the Field Manager for the Bureau of Land Management's Las Vegas Field Office. I want to thank you for joining us this evening, where we will be presenting on the Piute-Eldorado Valley Area of Critical Environmental Concern, also known as an ACEC Management Plan and Associated Draft Environmental Assessment. The ACEC plan will assist us in guiding our management of this important area over the next 20 years. Thank you again for joining us, and I look forward to hearing your input. Next slide, please, Susie. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to present information about the Piute-Eldorado Valley ACEC Management Plan and Draft Environmental Assessment, to answer your questions and to hear your comments. For the agenda, I will introduce you to the team working on the project, and then we will go over some logistics about the meeting, have a presentation by the project manager that will include background, a summary of the proposed actions, and next steps. After that, we will go into the question and answer session, and finally, we will have a public comment period. We will close the meeting out at 8 p.m. Also be aware that the meeting is being recorded and will be available later for viewing on YouTube. Next slide, please. In the meeting today, we have our project manager, JJ Smith, who will be giving the presentation and answering questions live. He is supported by an interdisciplinary team with Jimmy Linares, Evan Myers, Braden Gard, Lee Kirk, and Steve Leslie, who will be helping to answer the questions in writing. Jared Kemper with ECM and Susie Morales with Recon are the contractors helping assist BLM with this project, and they are handling the logistics of tonight's meeting. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Susie to go over the meeting logistics. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Shauna, and good evening. My name is Susie Morales with Recon Environmental, and I will be providing you with information on the logistics for this virtual meeting. Your microphones and video will be turned off during the presentation. During the question and answer period after the presentation, please enter your questions in the Q&A box. All questions will be entered in writing, and we will read out the questions as we get to them. The chat box is reserved for technical questions about Zoom or other technical issues. After the presentation and Q&A session, we will begin the verbal comment session. Verbal comments will be received by pre-registrants first who indicate they would like to provide a comment. Then we will provide an opportunity for other participants to comment. Please refrain from use of inappropriate language. This meeting will be recorded for the project record, and all materials presented today will be made available online. Next slide, please. In case you have not used Zoom previously, use the Q&A icon for the question and answer session. Use the chat icon only for urgent technical questions. Use the raise hand feature during the public comment session. Mute and unmute will be controlled by the host during the meeting. For phone callers, use *9 to raise your hand to ask a question or provide a comment. For technical assistance, contact Jared at the email or phone number shown on the slide. JJ Smith will now provide the presentation on the Piute-Eldorado Valley ACEC Management Plan and associated EA. Next slide, please.
Well, thank you, Susie, and thank you everyone for attending. A little background on the project. The BLM designates areas of critical environmental concern where special management action is needed to protect important resources. In the case of the Piute-Eldorado Valley ACEC, the listing of the Mojave Desert tortoise as threatened under the Endangered Species Act and the need to protect that species and its habitat was the impetus for designating the ACEC. This designation happened in 1998 with the Las Vegas Resource Management Plan. Now, more recently, several things caused BLM to develop a plan of action specifically for the ACEC. One of those things was the selection of the ACEC as a mitigation recipient site for the unavoidable environmental impacts caused by solar energy development. Now, basically, environmental impacts to resources, including vegetation, soil, and wildlife within the Dry Lake Solar Energy Zone could not be addressed at that site. So the Piute-Eldorado Valley, ACEC, was selected as an alternative place to offset some of those environmental impacts by making commensurate improvements to soil, vegetation, wildlife, and those other resources that were impacted. Next slide, please. A quick orientation. On the map to the left, you can see the irregular shape of the Piute-Eldorado Valley ACEC in green down in the far southern portion of the state of Nevada. If you shift your attention to the map on the right, you can see the ACEC enlarged, also in green. And notice the large donut hole around the town of Searchlight near the center of the ACEC. There's another of these holes to the northwest or upper right of Searchlight. This is the Highland Range Crucial Bighorn Habitat Area. And that area was excluded when the ACEC was designated because it's not desert tortoise habitat. Surrounding the ACEC is a lot of other public land managed by BLM, but not part of the ACEC. And there's also a lot of land managed by the National Park Service in light blue, and a patchwork of private land in white. Next slide, please. Environmental assessments are used to analyze the environmental effects of a proposed action on public land. In this case, the proposed action is the list of activities in the ACEC management plan. The EA also analyzes and discloses the environmental effects of any alternative actions, including the impact of not implementing the projects in the ACEC management plan. The EA is also intended to help public officials make decisions that are based on the understanding of environmental consequences and to take actions that can protect, restore, and enhance the environment. This part of the NEPA process is designed to encourage and facilitate public involvement in decisions that affect the human environment as well. Now, it's important to note that the environmental assessment is for this ACEC management plan only. The plan is a way to pursue the objectives of the 1998 Las Vegas Resource Management Plan within the ACEC, but not to amend that resource management plan. That's a separate process. Next slide, please. The actions proposed in the ACEC management plan can be grouped into a few categories: reducing landscape fragmentation, improving wildlife habitat quality and connectivity, improving the condition of soils and vegetation, enhancing the visual or scenic quality of the ACEC, and developing sustainable recreation opportunities, including public outreach and education programs. Next slide, please. For reducing landscape fragmentation, the environmental assessment analyzes projects that address some long overdue route maintenance issues, including modifying one designated open route to deal with deterioration of this Loran Station Road, which is shown in this photo. The plan also includes the restoration of linear disturbances, where people have just driven off of the designated route network and created new paths, which contribute to fragmentation of the desert and a lot of other related environmental problems. Next slide, please. Let's take a closer look at the ACEC route network. So routes within the ACEC were designated as either open or closed in the 1998 Las Vegas Resource Management Plan. At that time, about 425 miles of routes were designated as open to motorized use. An additional 118 miles were designated as closed. So the ACEC management plan does not propose any changes to these designations. Any future changes to the route network would require a separate public process other than the one we're doing now. The only proposed action related to an open route in the ACEC management plan is a modification to that Loran Station Road that I showed in the previous slide. And that's just to remove old asphalt and realign the road with drainage crossings to deal with some erosion and sedimentation issues. Otherwise, the primary maintenance issue with the route network is with the designated closed routes. Of the 118 miles of routes that were designated as closed back in 1998, about 100 miles of those appear to be driven on recently or currently. The ACEC management plan proposes several activities to address this, including updating and maintaining signs for open routes so that visitors know for sure they're driving on a designated open route. And where needed, signs would also be used to mark the closed routes. And, add a few also kiosks or other informational panels to advise visitors where the open routes are. A long-term monitoring and maintenance plan for signs, as well as some focused ranger patrols, would also be included. Just having someone out there day to day checking on routes, replacing damaged signs, raking out motorcycle tracks, and having face-to-face visitor contacts will help a lot with compliance to help people stay on the route network. And finally, restoration of closed routes when necessary. Next slide, please. Here's an example of a restoration treatment called vertical mulching, where a youth conservation crew came in and planted native tree seedlings and shrubs, along with a lot of dead material, dead sticks and other logs and things, to begin revegetating the site, and then also to sort of visually repair the site, disguise it so that somebody driving by doesn't notice it and feel like it's an open route and they just drive on it. A few challenging sites may require heavy equipment to do decompact soils or to place barriers like boulders or fencing to keep people from reopening some of these closed routes that are in recovery. Next slide, please. These same restoration techniques are proposed for restoration of disturbances, including these linear disturbances caused by people driving off the route network. In 2019, we identified 535 miles of these linear disturbances. A few were older disturbances that are slowly healing on their own, but almost 90% appear to be, from satellite images, appear to have some evidence of being driven on. And about 3/4 of those are classified as single track, so a lot of motorcycle activity out there, and the rest are 2 tracks or caused by 4-wheel vehicles. Next slide, please. In addition to restoring closed routes and linear disturbances, the environmental assessment analyzes a few other activities specifically to improve wildlife habitat. One project would be to install wildlife fences along the larger paved roads in the ACEC as a way to reduce wildlife roadkill. But fences fragment habitat for some species unless they are connected to safe places for those species to cross beneath roads, especially roads with a lot of traffic. Over 40 wildlife species, including desert tortoises, have been noted using culverts to cross beneath roadways. So the ACEC management plan recommends making use of these existing culverts by tying new or existing wildlife fence into them, as shown, kind of illustrated by the yellow fence line in the bottom right picture. The plan also recommends relocating and adding several new miles of fencing, modifying culverts that currently block or could even entrap wildlife, and then also working with partners to maintain culverts for wildlife use or even adding some specific wildlife culverts. So a lot of this work would be focused on the Nipton Road. Next slide, please. A few projects are proposed to restore areas where soil and vegetation have been damaged by past land uses, including sites associated with past mining activity. Many of the same restoration techniques mentioned earlier would be used. There are a few springs in and adjacent to the ACEC that were modified in the past and are currently being heavily impacted by feral or estray cattle coming out of the nearby McCullough Mountains. Cattle are affecting the water quality and the quantity, as well as the vegetation and soil surrounding springs. So the ACEC plan calls for removing trash, old piping, except for anything that's culturally significant, treating invasive weeds where necessary, some sediment management to ensure wildlife can safely access water, and then most importantly, removal of these feral cattle, which would be a joint effort with state agencies. Next slide, please. A number of other activities are included in the ACEC management plan to improve visual quality. These include removing graffiti, using rock stain to disguise disturbed areas while they heal, and the removal of trash. Activities like these almost always benefit wildlife and other natural resource values other than just the visual or scenic quality. Next slide, please. And finally, the development of a strategy for a sustained public outreach and education program is being proposed. These activities include the focused ranger patrols that I mentioned earlier, increases in visitor contacts, collecting visitor use data to be able to respond to changing patterns of recreation, and following an established communication plan that's tailored for this specific area. Next slide, please. The environmental analysis points out that some of these proposed activities, including fencing, restoration of linear disturbances, modifying that Loran Station Road, and some of the other activities, will cause some temporary disturbance, and that will need to be monitored and addressed. But longer term, the actions would produce a much larger beneficial impact to the natural resources in the ACEC. So our preliminary findings in the EA are that we would meet the goals of the Dry Lake Solar Energy Zone Mitigation Implementation Plan, and that we would be taking the appropriate steps toward the goals of the Las Vegas Resource Management Plan, as well as the Desert Tortoise Recovery Plan. Next slide, please. A little on where we go from here. Starting in the upper left, we had several pre-NEPA meetings to gather input and develop this draft ACEC management plan. And then here in blue, we incorporated a lot of your feedback from the public and cooperators, and we analyzed that new draft ACEC management plan in this environmental assessment. So now we're here in the center bottom bubble in the middle of the 30-day review of the environmental assessment. So we'll begin reviewing and addressing public comments as soon as the comment period closes, which is coming up later in the month on April 19th. And then we'll move towards a decision if there are no significant impacts found. Implementation will begin after the appeal period ends. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Susie to get our question and answer session going. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, JJ. The question and answer period will be approximately 30 minutes. You can provide a question by clicking on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Type your question and press the send button. Please only submit your question once. Wait for BLM to answer your question live or in writing. The BLM will answer your question in the chat box or verbally on video. BLM will answer your questions as quickly as possible, but it may take a few minutes for them to process the question and provide an answer. Don't use the chat button to submit a question. Use only the Q&A icon. This is your opportunity to ask specific questions regarding the ACEC and management plan. Please note that BLM will not answer questions during the comment period. However, you can provide questions via the chat. The approximately 60-minute public comment period will follow the question and answer period. JJ Smith, project manager, will be responding to some questions live. A team of specialists will be responding to some questions in writing. And thank you for your patience as we wait for questions to come in and for BLM to work on responses. And while we're waiting for some questions to come in, we will read through some of the questions from last night's meeting. Oh, we have a question. What type of comments would be most helpful from the community?
Oh, yeah, thanks for the question. So, the most useful comments would inform us of any additional data that we might not have known about when we started this process or applied to the environmental assessment. Any features or uses in the ACEC that were perhaps not considered in the analysis, any environmental effects that might require further analysis, and in any sort of supporting information that could help us make an informed decision. It's a big area. There might be something we missed. So thank you.
Thank you, JJ. We have another question. What are the benefits of the proposed federal action? And this was from last night.
Thanks, Susie. The activities that we're proposing and that were analyzed in the environmental assessment will improve the condition of natural resources, including the protection of the desert tortoise, for which the ACEC was designated, and which is a federally threatened species. The benefits of conservation and restoration also extend to the human environment. So properly functioning ecosystems that are resistant to disturbances and resilient to changes will continue to provide high quality recreational opportunities for humans, for activities like hiking, camping, hunting, wildlife watching, horseback riding, and of course off-highway vehicle travel on designated routes.
Thank you, JJ. We have another question we had previously. Is there a plan for expansion of the ACEC in the future?
So this environmental assessment that we're covering tonight does not analyze any changes to the size of the ACEC. Expanding or contracting the ACEC is a resource management plan decision that would require a separate public planning process. The ACEC management plan does make some recommendations for addressing minor boundary discrepancies that create gaps and slivers where some administrative boundaries are misaligned, but that's it. Correcting these, anything bigger than that would require a resource management plan amendment.
Thank you, JJ. And a previous question, what is the difference between existing routes and designated routes?
Yeah, these terms are sometimes used interchangeably, but there is an important distinction. Routes that are designated as open are the only ones that are officially open for motorized travel. There are other existing tracks or what might look like routes or roads on the ground, but these are usually either roads that were officially closed but are getting used again now, maybe accidentally because the sign fell down and somebody didn't realize it was a closed route, or it's just a disturbance where one person starts, driving across the desert, and then the next person finds those same tracks and starts driving on them, and then they become what look like a road.
Thank you, JJ. We have another question. What is BLM going to do about vandalism in the area?
So the ACEC management plan recommends several activities to address vandalism, including additional monitoring to help identify newly vandalized areas quickly so that we can take care of them. Trash and graffiti cleanup events to really demonstrate consistent presence out there by people who care about that area. And then, increased presence by staff as well. These focused ranger patrols are hopefully going to help a lot. Just showing people that we have eyes and ears out there on the ground watching these types of activities.
Thank you. Another question we had previously is, why is BLM doing this ACEC management plan now?
Yeah, the designation of the ACEC and the allowable uses and activities were set in 1998, and those help protect the desert tortoise habitat. However, invasive plants have been invading rapidly. The wildfire risk has been growing, and wildlife mortality along unfenced sections of road, and as well as this extensive off-route motorized travel, those things are continuing, and they continue to pose management challenges. So these need to be addressed if we're going to be able to meet the conservation objectives of the resource management plan. Also, with the selection of the ACEC as a dry lake solar energy zone mitigation recipient site, and the award of a Southern Nevada Public Land Management Act project to Clark County, we now have an opportunity to collaborate with our partners and fund some pretty major conservation projects in the ACEC. So the timing is good.
Thank you, JJ. We have another question. Will the area be closed open to certain activities?
Yeah, allowable activities in the ACEC will remain the same as outlined in the 1998 Resource Management Plan. These include recreational activities like camping, hunting, wildlife watching, horseback riding, and off-highway vehicle travel on these designated routes. Restrictions on the size and the timing of recreational events and the speed of events, no high-speed events are allowed. Those remain the same as they have been for the last 20 years or so. And the area will remain, as it has been, closed to new mineral development or new renewable energy development as well.
Thank you, JJ. We'll pause for a little bit to see if any additional questions come in. We have a question that was received during registration, JJ. Is there a special designation to protect the tortoise while still allowing OHV on trails and roads in the area?
So the current ACEC designation, it allows for off-highway vehicle travel, but only on these open routes. So under this proposed plan, you'll still be able to use your OHV on any road or route as long as it's designated as open.
Thank you, JJ. We'll wait a couple more minutes to see if any additional questions come in. And if not, we'll move on to the public comment period. We'll give folks a couple more minutes. Doesn't look like we have any further questions. Just a note that BLM will not answer questions verbally during the comment period. However, you can send comments through the Q&A feature and BLM will respond in writing during the comment period. With that, we'll move on to the approximately 60-minute comment period. Next slide, please. The public comment period will be approximately 60 minutes. Comments will be accepted in the order of registration. Once your name is called, please use the raised hand feature and the forum facilitator will open your microphone. If you are on the phone, you can raise your hand with *9. A timer will be displayed on your screen to show the time remaining for your input. Your input will be included in the project record. Next slide, please. BLM wants to hear from all members of the public. Out of respect for everyone's participation and input, we will be using the following guidelines. We ask that you please stay within your allotted comment time so that everyone has an opportunity to speak and provide their comments. Please be respectful of others, and please refrain from profanity. If time allows, you will be provided with an additional opportunity to comment. If guidelines are not followed, your microphone will be muted and we will move to the next commenter. The following information would provide the most useful type of comments. Is there additional information, data, or analysis which should be considered? Is information, data, or analysis incorrect or not thoroughly considered? Next slide, please. Normally, we would call out a list of commenters, but we did not have any participants indicate during registration from the virtual meeting that they wish to provide a comment. So we'll open the comment session to anyone who would like to comment. Please use the raise hand feature to let us know you would like to comment, and we will unmute your microphone. Please also unmute the microphone on your end. BLM does appreciate your participation and input and thanks you for your time this evening. If you have additional questions or would like to provide a comment in writing, you can do that through the BLM e-planning site for this project, or through email or regular mail, which that information will be provided in a coming slide. We are going to go ahead and leave the comment period open until 8 o'clock. And again, we appreciate your time. Next slide, please. Shauna Duman, Field Manager, will close this evening's presentation. And again, we will leave the presentation open and the comment period open until 8 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you, Susie. And thank you for joining us this evening. We do appreciate it. As Susie said, we can take comments until April 19th, and the information on this slide is provided to let you know how to submit your comments either by email or regular mail. I'm sorry, April 19th for the comment due date. And on behalf of BLM and our consulting team, I'd like to thank you for your participation. We are leaving the meeting and comment period open until 8 o'clock. So if you have any additional comments that you want to make, please raise your hand and we'll call on you. Otherwise, I hope everyone has a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Shauna. And again, we'll leave the comment period open until 8 p.m.